Hello, everyone. I want to thank you again for joining us on today's seminar training, which will be going over through pathology. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Florina CP, and I'm a lab application specialist at Meditech. I will be presenting along with Alicia McDonough, which is also a lab application specialist. The agenda, I will be going, when I will go over through this presentation, I will frequently stop to ask questions. I do need to let you know that throughout the presentation you are muted. Also, when I stop for asking questions, you will be muted. So please, if you do have any questions, chat those through the chat option from the WebEx so we can read them and we can go over through the different questions you will have. If there is any follow-up questions that we'll need to do more research on our end, we will do so and we'll let you provide you with an answer as soon as possible after this presentation. Also, if I do tend to speed up while I'm presenting, please raise your hand or let me know through chat so I can slow down and go over through the same, go over through some of the questions that you might have or any clarifications that I need to do further. So without further ado, I'll start today's presentation. We will go over through the pathology dictionary overview. Together, we'll be going over through the department data section. Department dictionary, data section, dictionary, specimen type, and medical terms. And then Alicia will be taking over for going through the pathology prompts and questionnaire, as well as pathology access settings. And finally, but not least, the pathology customer defined parameters. The first dictionary that we'll be going over through would be the department dictionary. I'll just branch over through to the system and get into the pathology dictionary. The pathway to get to the pathology dictionary, department dictionary will be ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, pathology, department, enter edit. For today's demonstration, I will be using one of the predefined entries from this dictionary. If I perform a lookup into the mnemonic prompt, I have a list of all the entries that are available or actually active at this point. So I will be choosing the surgical department. Again, as you might have gone through in the other trainings throughout this week, the functionality for the mnemonic prompt, active, name, and abbreviation remains the same. However, I will be going over through just into this dictionary since we're starting a new module, but I will be skipping them to not be redundant in this other the other dictionaries that I will be going over through. So as a mnemonic, you would have to identify, or you would have to enter the mnemonic of the department that you'd like to define for this dictionary, which will be a unique way how we'll identify this entry. At the active prompt, we have three options. However, the only options that you could use at this point is yes or no, as Expunge is no longer active once you go live with your system. It's a yes to make yes is to make an entry active, so it can be used while you are building the dictionaries, and no will be to inactivate the entry, so you no longer will be using a certain department and you will be creating a new one. At the name prompt, you would have to enter a descriptive name for the department that you are defining through this dictionary. And at the abbreviation, you would have to give it an abbreviation for the department that you are building. The prefix prompt, as we can see it at this point, it is grayed out because this is done to save the integrity of our system, which means that once you enter a prefix for a department, you can no longer change it in the future, and this will also not allow the users to corrupt any specimens that have been ordered for a particular department. So in case that you want to change the prefix of a certain department, our recommendation would be that you would inactivate that dictionary and create a new one with a new prefix. The duplicate check days prompt, this is a free text prompt, or you would have to enter a number at this prompt, which will be the number of days that you want the system to check for a duplicate order for a patient, a duplicate order within the same department for the same patient. With the current setup, looks like the system will check for a duplicate order for another surgical case for the same patient. Now we'll be branching over into this portion under the auto queue for file for MS Word creation. At this portion over here, we will be determining at which point the system will automatically create the MS Word. So we can have the system create an MS Word for different statuses, and for each of those statuses that we want the MS Word report to be created, we will have to define them in the status prompt. And for each of the statuses, we can have a report format that we can generate for, or that we can have the system to automatically create for it. We can have one, but we can have multiple. The report format that will be used will be identified under the report format prompt dictionary. Under the report format prompt, and that is a lookup into our report format dictionary, where we can choose as many formats as we want to be generated. And the format that will be generated is independent of from one status to another. As we can see at the enter status, we can have a few of them, and then at the sign out status, we can have just one report that will be automatically created. At the exclude facility prompt, here you will have to list all the facilities for which you want to exclude or have the system not to create the MS Word. And in this case will be the pathology historical facility for which you do not want the MS Word to be generated at any point. Last but not least, we have the file maintenance, the barcode, number of days, and when the barcodes will be file maintenance. This prompt over here, it is a lookup into our system dictionary file maintenance parameters. So just bear with me for a second while I get into that dictionary. So here, this is the pathology system parameters. Obviously, you guys can view them, but you cannot access them, so you cannot make any changes, and these changes need to be done from us. And here on the file maintenance relays prompt, we do have the pathology barcode, and which is defined to 120, and that is the reason why as soon as I brought my cursor over to that prompt, it defaulted to 120, but it can be changed. This is the number of days that the system will keep a barcode assigned to a case before it can be reused for the next case. That concludes the setup or how you would define a department within the pathology module. If you do have any questions, please let us know at the chat at this point. It does look like we do not have any questions at this point, so I will continue with our presentation. So the next dictionary that we'll go over through, it is the data section dictionary. There are two types of data sections that we can define within the Meditech system, Meditech pathology module. The first one will be the standard one, and the second one will be the custom defined one. Give me a second because we do have a question from Jason. It looks like he's asking if there is a program that prints barcodes for different label size. That would be a really good question. I will have to do some research on our end, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. The question that I will have to get back to Jason and to everybody will be if we do have a program that prints barcodes for different label sizes. So I will be following up with that question for Jason, and now we will continue with the data section dictionary. So there are two types, as I was saying, there are two types of data sections that we can define within the system, the standard one and the customer defined one. So let's start with the standard one. Usually the standard data sections that you can define through Meditech will be prefixed by the period, and the list of all the standard data sections within our system are the ones that are listed and are appearing into these slides as well. So the first one is the .co, which is for medical codes. This data section, it is used to list all the pathology specimen codes that will be used for a specimen, a pathology specimen. The .com, which is the comment. This is a text editor which allows you to enter general comments about a specimen. It will appear automatically in enter-edit requisition and also in the enter-edit findings routine. The next data section, it is a copies to. This data section is used to list the physicians who should receive reports for this specimen. You can also add doctors that should receive reports or delete those that should not be getting this report. So the doctors listed here will flow over from the pathology into edit requisition, and all of the doctors that are listed under the doctors tab into enter edit requisition. The next data section is the .cp, which is for the concept. This is used if your facilities use the SNOMED RT, and this data section provides a centralized location where the system collects and stores the concept. The next two data sections are fairly similar, the .hist and the .hist2 data section. Both of these data sections are used for histology. However, the .hist1 data section, it is used to list the tissues that make up the pathology specimen. For instance, the histologist codes the number of blocks, cassettes, and levels created for each piece of tissue in a pathology specimen. The .hist2 data section will provide you with similar information as the .hist1 data section, but has greater details. For instance, the tissues entered in enter-edit pathology findings routine under the .tis data section appear in the .hist2 data section, will appear under this .hist2 data section, and also you can define additional procedures based on the blocks and the levels that you have been creating through this data section. So basically, it has similar functionality as the .hist, but it provides greater detail. The next data section is the .icd, which stands for the ICD code. You will use this data section to add or delete ICD codes associated with a specimen. The next data section that we have, it is the .mrk, which is for markers. You will use this data section to add or delete markers associated with the specimen. The markers data sections also appear if you edit the medical code data section by adding a marker to a medical term. I believe we were stopped by the order by the markers. Oops, let's go back. At the markers. So this would be the copies data section, the specimen comments. This is the text editor that I was talking about. The .copies to, which this is where we will list all of the doctors that should be receiving the report for a pathology case. And again, I will be going over through all of these data sections by the end of my presentation, when we will see how all of the dictionaries that I will be going over are tied together into a pathology case. This is the concepts where we will list the different concepts or the tissues that associated to a pathology case. Here we have an example of the .hist data section that provides us with the basic information regarding the blocks, cassettes, pieces for a particular tissue or for all of the tissues within a pathology case. And this is the .hist2 data section. As you can notice, the difference between the screens, between both .hist and hist2, where here we'll see a greater detail that we can enter for a certain tissues and for each of the blocks and levels that have been created for it. The .icd codes, the .icd data section, which will provide us with the ICD codes associated with a case. This is the .its data section, which stands for Imaging and Therapeutic Services. You would use this data section to link the pathology specimens to an image and therapeutic service order, which will be a radiology order. The next data section, it is the .pp data section where we'll list all of the procedures that have been performed on a pathology case. And the next one, even though looks like similar to the .p, is the .ppc data section. This is the pathology procedure complete. Here is where this data section will list all of the procedures that have been ordered on a case, but also it will indicate whether or not those are completed. If there would be any procedure that has not been completed, are marked with the yes and under the complete column. The system, if you're trying to sign out a case, the system will prompt you with a warning message saying that some of the procedures are not completed if you want to continue to sign out the case, yes or no. The next, this data section is the .qa data section, and this data section is used to agree, disagree, or edit findings for a specimen for quality assurance purposes. The data section maintains the agreement and disagreement to findings that occur during the QA review. In the next data section, it is the .tis, which is for the tissues. You will use this data section to list the tissues associated with a specimen. The list includes the tissue's preferred terms or identification code as defined in the Pathology Medical Term Dictionary. We do have the last also another data section, which is the .wkld, which is for the workload, and you would use that data section to assign workload to a specimen, and you can use this data section to account for additional work that has not accounted for in other areas. Now we'll go through the custom defined data sections, which a list of all those data sections are provided into this slide. So without further ado, we will take a look of how these data sections are defined into our system. So let's branch over into our data section dictionary. The pathway to get to the data section dictionary is fairly similar. It is ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, pathology, data section. The pathology specimen types consist of data sections, which are individual files that are used to document our findings. For a pathology case, if a pathology specimen is considered as a book, then the data section is considered as a chapter. And each of these data sections has its own set of criteria and is independent of any other data sections linked to a specimen. Also, patient reports can be defined to include or exclude individual data sections. We can have also statistics that can be generated based on the results entered for data sections, such as the specimen results or the pathology searches and statistics. So once we get into the pathology data section, we'll start with and seeing how a standard data section is defined through this dictionary. So I will be choosing the .his2 data section to go over through it. Again, we have the mnemonic active name and abbreviation, which are the same as we have seen so far. At the type prompt, we will define, or we will enter the prompt, the type of the data section that we are defining through this dictionary. And after the first file, you will that prompt will be grayed out, and you will not be able to change it. And this is again to save the integrity of our system. If I am skipping any of the prompts that are grayed out at this time through this dictionary, that means that those prompts do not apply for that particular data section type that we are going over. So into this prompt, into this page for a .his2 data section, I will stop over to the confidential prompt. It is a yes or no prompt. If the findings entered through this data section should be considered as confidential, you will have to enter yes into this prompt. Otherwise, you'll enter no, and those data sections will be available. Those findings will be available for everybody. And then we'll skip over into the edit after sign out. If we actually set it up to no, We will have also access over to edit after preliminary sign out. These two prompts have similar functionality. This is if they are both set up to yes, we are giving users the access or the ability to edit these data sections after the specimen is being preliminary sign out or PSO, or after the specimen have been signed out, which is SO. So if this prompt is set up to yes, then users do have ability to edit these the findings entered for a particular data section at these two major time or these two specimen statuses: preliminary sign out and sign out status. So we'll go over to page 2, as the rest of those data sections of those prompts do not apply to the .his2 data section. At this point, the restricted term types prompt, we have TIS listed and also grayed out. Well, it does make sense that we have only the tissues as the term type restricted for the histology, because this is the histology data section, and we will be entering the information related to a tissue. That is why we have it as grayed out and only the TIS listed as the term type for which it is restricted. The transcription workload does not apply this data section, so we'll skip over and come into this quadrant over here. At change status, there are a couple. This is where we would have a lookup into the pathology statuses dictionary. However, this is a self-built dictionary, so once you enter a status and you will click file, the system will automatically file as an available option for a lookup. In here, we have a lookup to, we can have 4 entries or 4 different statuses that we can use: diag, entered, gross, and micro. So the change status at this prompt, you would have to enter or define a status for which you want the system to assign to the pathology specimen after you have filed or entered the findings within this data section. So after we are entering all the tissue information for blocks and levels, after we file it, the system will assign the micro status to the pathology case. The next prompt is the file maintenance days. Into this prompt, you would have to identify the number of days for which you want the system to save the information entered into a particular data section. This information over here defaults or also is being determined into our system parameters. On page 1 of the system parameters, we have the data section file maintenance. So we have a high number of days. What is the maximum number of days we can enter? The minimum number of days that we can save that information, and we have the default number of days. So the 1096 that is defaulting currently in our system, that comes from our system parameters, but it can be edited, and it cannot be lower than 30, and it cannot be higher than 9,999. At the workload function prompt, you would have to identify a workload function for which you want the system to account when entering findings into a pathology data section. Cause activity. Into this prompt, there are 3 options: never, before sign out, and always. The entry into this prompt will determine how frequently the system will cause or will save as new activity to the patient. To the case when you are entering findings through a data section. You will choose never to never cause activity if you are entering findings through this data section. Before sign out, this will save the system to cause activity on the case, on the pathology specimens when we are entering findings through this data section, but the case is not signed out yet. And always is to always cause activity anytime that we are, if we are entering new findings into this data section, or if we are editing those findings into this data section. The next prompt, it is internal, yes or no. If the findings for these data sections should be kept internal and not to print or external report, then enter yes. Otherwise, if these findings need to be printed on the external report, enter no. At the LOIN code and nomenclature map, you would have to identify the appropriate LOIN code and nomenclature map that you want to assign for the data sections that you are defining. At this point, we can capture any histology workload. So at this section, under the histology workload section, we can define the workload that will be captured for the pieces, cassettes and blocks, and levels. The next prompt, it is the use checkmark field. It is a yes or no prompt. So when you are going and when you are processing a pathology case through histology, if this prompt is set up to yes, then the histotext will have to go into the system and mark every step of the preparation from the blocks to levels to cassettes and to stain, and mark these preparation steps as completed before the tissue or the block can be available for the next step, which will be the levels. So if you are, and I will be going over through at the end to make it more, so you guys could have an idea how it works. But basically, if you have 4 blocks created for a pathology tissue, and you would need to mark all of these 3 blocks as completed before you can go to the next level, which will be the levels. If you mark only one of them as completed, then only that one will be available for the next step. Otherwise, if you want the system to allow the users to continue through the histology processing, you will mark that, set this prompt over to no. The next prompt, it is the auto report format sort number. So here we have a lookup into the sort number, the selection or the section sort numbers. However, this prompt over here work in conjunction with another prompt into our report format dictionary. So in report format dictionary, on page 3 is where we would define the different loops that will be used to print the pathology results. So on page 3, I have the different loops that I will be defined, or the different fragments that I will be used for different to display the different information for a pathology case. However, I do have the pathology finding loops. If I perform a lookup into this prompt, there are 4 different loops: 1, 2, 3, and 4. Depending on which loop I am defining within that pathology finding loop prompt, will determine how the data section will be printed into the report. If I'm using loop 1 and loop 4, the system will print the pathology data sections as they are defined into the order that they are defined into the pathology data section, pathology report format dictionary, which we define it into this routine. But if the system is using loops 2 or loops 3, or if I have defined loop 2 or loop 3 into this dictionary, then the system will take a look into our data section dictionary, see what is the sort number over here, and we'll print that data section first, and then we'll print the rest of the data sections as defined into the pathology report format dictionary. I will be going over into the next type of data section data section that we can define through this dictionary, and that will be a free type data section. I just wanted to point out that if you are, let's say, trying to create a new one, the system will obviously ask if there is for confirmation that this is a new data section. To set it up to active, give it a name, an abbreviation, and if you perform a lookup into the type, you can be creating, or you have access over to only the data section, the custom defined data section. So the standard one, you cannot change it, but these are the only types of data section that you can build. And you can create a free type data section. Obviously, before you can file it, you still have available, you will still have the ability to change the type. But if you file it, then that type prompt will be grayed out. However, let's take a look how a free type data section is being defined. A free type data section, it is the only type of data section that will be used the Medicare document. So if you need to, if you want to use a particular Medicare document for entering the findings for this particular data section, which is the final diagnosis in this case, then you would have to identify that data section, document at this prompt over here. At this point, the MS Word document, it is not available, but if I had a data section that used the Word document, which will be used the type Word, then at this point I have the ability to identify an MS Word document that will be used for entering the findings for the final diagnosis data section. And then we have the maximum line length, which it is a maximum number of characters that you can enter into one line. It defaults to 92, but it can be changed. Please also be cautious that not to enter any numbers longer than or higher than what it defaults, because the defaults are also the maximum number of characters that you can fit into a line, and that is in accordance to how the reports are be built and the space available in the reports at a later time. And then we do have the font name and the font size that will be used to enter the findings for a particular data section. We'll go to this prompt over here. We went over already through the confidential, but we have the get code prompt. At this prompt, you would have to, at the get code, it is a yes or no prompt. You would have to enter yes to automatically file any codes attached to the medical terms. Otherwise, you would have to enter no. The next prompt, it is the dictated by. It is a yes or no prompt. So if you want the system to request the user to enter the mnemonic of who is dictating the findings for a particular data section, you set this prompt to yes. Otherwise, if you do not want the system to require the user to enter its mnemonic or the username before entering any findings for a particular data section, please set this prompt over to yes, to no. The rest of this information on page 1 does not apply for a Word type nor for a free type data section. And we'll go on page 2, where most of the information will be remain the same. We do not have any more access to the use checkmark field, as this is related only to histology. But at this point, we can capture the workload for the transcriptionist, when we can define a workload function for to capture for charts, for characters, for words, for lines, and minutes that have been entered. And for each of the functions, workload functions identified into the function column, we can have a number entered under the multiplier column, which will be used to multiply the function defined into the previous prompt. The next prompt of the data section that or the next type of data section that I'll go over, it is a questionnaire type. So a questionnaire type, as you could see, it is a quest type. At this time, I have access over to these two prompts. The functionality of these two prompts, it is similar. Both of them look up into the pathology questionnaire dictionary. However, the questionnaire defined into the questionnaire screen, it is the questionnaire that will appear into the enter edit findings routine, where you can enter as many information as you would like. Meanwhile, the questionnaire view, this is the questionnaire that will be used to display that information captured from enter edit findings and will display it on the report. So the first one, it is a questionnaire used for capturing that information through enter edit findings routine. The second one is to display that information onto the report. The questionnaires can be the same, but it can be also different, where in the report you want less information to be displayed. And then the rest of the information on page 1 and page 2 remains the same. The next type of data section that I will go over is an image type data section. As I said, this data section will be used to capture any images that you can have into your system, or that you can use a scanner to associate it with a pathology case. The only prompt that does apply to an image type data section is the image method. There are two options, the acquire and browse. You would enter acquire if you have a Mark Twain compatible device that you will be scanning and capturing that image information into the system as you are scanning it. Browse, you will use the browse method to capture that image if you have it somehow filed into or saved into your system. And then the rest of the information on page 1 and 2 remains the same. We have another type of data section, which is a result data section. And this type of data section is to display or even file the lab results or micro results or blood bank results of different tests that you want to associate it with a pathology case. For instance, if you're doing the bone marrow to a patient, you might want to look the test or the results from the CBC for that patient. So for a result type data section, we have this last quadrant on page 1 that it is available for it. The test view group. This prompt it is a lookup into the LIS test view group dictionary, and here is the test view group that you want to associate it with this data section, which contains all the tests, the lab tests, or other tests that you want for which you want to see the results for when you are entering findings for a pathology case. The next prompt it is the safe prompt. There are three options: yes, no, and ask. If you enter yes into this prompt, then the system will automatically file the results for the tests that are associated into the test view group automatically. If you enter no, then the system will just default the result for those tests, but will not file those results into a pathology case. And ask, the system will be defaulting those results from the test view group for a pathology case, but then we'll ask the user whether or not they want to file those results into the pathology case. And then the last but not least, we have the allow delete. We have this prompt, it is a yes or no prompt. If you enter yes into this prompt, then you are giving the users the ability to delete any results for the test associated with the test view group to be deleted by the system or the case. And if you enter no, then you are not giving the users the ability to delete those results from a pathology case. And then the rest of information on page 1 and 2 remains the same. Then the last type of data section that I will be taking over through you guys will be the addendum type data section. We have two types of the addendum. We can have an addendum they use in Meditor, or we can have a type of addendum that can use Word. The only thing that I want to point out for Word for an addendum data section are these two prompts over here on page 1, the edit after preliminary sign out and edit after sign out. These two prompts are standardly set up to no and yes respectively. This is because an addendum cannot be entered at any time before the case is signed out. That is why we can enter information of findings for an addendum when the case it is signed out. And on page 2, the change status should be to an addendum, and the cause activity should always be always. This concludes the different data sections that you can define through the data section dictionary. At this point, if you do have any questions, please try to let us know for those questions through chat, so we can read them and we can provide you with an information. So we do have a question from Kim Brothers, which is asking, can you bold the diagnosis? Are you requesting to bold a data section, or just the header of that data section, or the entire data section that might be called diagnosis? Most of the time, whether or not a piece of information will be bolded, that depends on the report that you're using. If you Okay, so it says, can the enter edit path dictionary include cytology? So for the first question, can you bold the diagnosis? Those are functionalities within Mediter or MS Word. So if you want certain piece of information to be bolded, to be italicized, or to have some type of graphics, you would have to do it through the document, the type of the document that you're doing, that you are entering the information or the findings. So if you're using Mediter, yes, there is a way how you can bold it. There is a feature within the Mediter. And if you are using MS Word, you will use that MS Word feature that will bold out the information. So that is how you can bold the findings or even the header of the data section. So it's not done through Meditext. So Kim, the next question that she has regarding to bold the diagnosis, you're mentioning that if this is a manual process, or if we cannot or can set the bold diagnosis only. Unfortunately, yeah, it has to be a manual process. So if it's just one particular word, you'd have to do it manually. However, these are very specific questions that might be pertaining only to your system. So the better way for us to approach to these to your questions will be to open a task with your specialist, and I will be more than happy to assist your specialist as well with it. But if one word within the entire findings needs to be bolded out, has to be a manual process. We cannot tell the system to automatically do it for you. Also, Kim, you do have another question saying, can the enter-edit path dictionary include cytology? I would like to add HPV to the GYN report. Since again, this seems to be specific to a certain report that you are currently using into your system, which is the GYN report. So we would, if we could have that information entered into a task with your specialist, I will take a look further, because I would need to remote into your system and check the setup, how it's being set up, and how you would like, or the edits that you would like to add to do to those reports. If we could have that report or task open for the report, we can go on from there. So we have a question from Jason saying that how many screens are needed to add an addendum. So basically you have only one addendum, you need only one addendum data section associated with a specimen type, which is the next dictionary that I will be going over. How many addendums you can enter? You can enter as many as you want. So if you have a pathology case that is being signed out, you can enter the first addendum, and then you can sign out that addendum. If at a later time your pathologist decides they need to enter another addendum, then you can just go back to the case and enter the second addendum, and so on. The system also has the ability to say addendum 1, addendum 2, addendum 3, and so on. So anytime that you only need one addendum, but you can enter as many addendum as you want, and those will be numbered out. And please remember to always sign out those addendums so you can distinguish the different addendums that you enter at different times. Also to set up the timestamps for each of the addendum and whenever they were signed out. If there are there any other questions before I can continue with the next dictionary, please let us know so. Okay, so I do not see any other questions at this point, so I will continue with the next dictionary, which is the specimen type dictionary. The pathway to go to that dictionary will be similar off from the pathology, and we have the specimen type. So the pathology specimen type dictionary, it is used to determine how a specimen is ordered, resulted, and reported. This dictionary determines which data sections are available in requisition entry and findings entry. It also determines which data sections are required to sign out and how pathology data data is formatted in the EMR. So let's just take a look of how you can define a specimen type through this dictionary. Again, I'll be using a predefined one. So I'll skip the first 4 and I'll go under the type. At the type prompt, there are 3 options: gynecological, non-gynecological, and other. At this prompt, you have to enter the type which corresponds to the entry being defined. The gynecological tissues, which you will choose GYN, the non-gynecological tissues, which is non-GYN, or other tissues, which is other. The next prompt, it is the order screen. So if there is any additional information that you will need to capture for a particular pathology specimen or for a particular specimen type, you would have to identify that customer-defined screen at this prompt. Again, we have the duplicate check days. So this is the other dictionary where we are seeing this prompt. At this prompt, you'd have to enter the number of days for which you want the system to check for another duplicate hour for a particular specimen type for a patient. The LIS only. This prompt, you might have seen it as well in other dictionaries, such as the lab test dictionary, page 1, micro procedure, or blood bank test dictionary. So this will determine whether or not a certain pathology specimen type can order, if an order for a particular specimen type can be placed from OM or order management. So in 615, we brought back the functionality of the physicians being able to enter pathology orders, and this is how we set up. So if you want a physician to place an order in order management for a particular specimen type, you set the LIS prompt to no. If you want for the pathology for this particular pathology specimen type to be placed only in lab and not to also be viewable in OM, you set it up to L. But if you want a pathology specimen type to be ordered only from lab but being viewable in OM, then you set it up to yes. The next prompt is ask slides read. The entry into this prompt will determine at which point the system will require the users to enter the number of slides that are read. If you set it up to read, that means that the slides read the system will ask for the number of slides read at the time when you are entering the requisition. If you enter find into this prompt, then the system will ask the user to enter the number of slides read when it is in enter findings routine. If it's set up to both, then the system will ask for the slides read when both at the requisition and the findings entry. And if you set it up to auto, then the system will automatically calculate the number of slides read based on the information entered in the pathology medical term dictionary. Process histology. This prompt is a yes or no prompt. So if you set this prompt to yes, then you are marking a pathology specimen, a certain specimen type, to be eligible to be processed in histology. And if you set this prompt to no, then a particular case for a certain specimen type will not be able for processing in histology. The next prompt will have the QA entry screen. Into this prompt, you'd have to identify the entry screen that will be used for quality assurance. QC specimen type. This prompt, it is a yes or no prompt. If you enter yes into this prompt, that you are saying that this specimen type will be used for QC specimens only. And if you set this prompt to yes, then you have ability to enter a number for which the system will save the information for this QC specimen. But if you set this prompt to no, then you are saying that the surgical in this case cannot be a specimen type used for QC specimens, and then the system will keep the QC file maintained safe. I will go to the next prompt, which is the accept unrestricted terms. This prompt over here works in conjunction with another prompt within pathology module, and it is from the medical term dictionary. I will just touch base at this point and show to what prompt it works with, but we will come to this dictionary in a little bit. So as you can see, we have the specimen type prompt for a medical term. So we can restrict certain terms to be available only for specific specimen types, or we can have them not to be restricted for a specimen type when this prompt is set up is left blank. So if I have here restricted to a certain specimen type, then the system will take a look into our pathology specimen type dictionary. And if this prompt is set up to no, accept unrestricted terms to no, that means that the terms available, the medical terms available for this specimen type will be only those that have the S defined as a specimen type in medical term dictionary. But if you enter yes into this prompt, that means that the medical terms available for these pathology specimen types will be any of the medical terms which can have this specimen type or cannot have a specimen type defined into there. The next prompt will be required specimen date. It is a yes or no prompt. As you might know, at this point in pathology, we do not have a collection date or a collection date, as that is being considered as the receive date. Basically, when you have the specimen into laboratory, that is being considered as a collection date as well. So beside the collection date, which is required, and you cannot file the case or a requisition without the receive date, we do have another date which is considered, which is set as a specimen date. If you want the system to require for the specimen date, enter yes. Otherwise, enter no. So I want to let you know, guys, that I do receive the chat, and however, I will be going over through the chat. I will be going over through the chats and questions at the end. So bear with me, guys, until I'm done with the dictionary, and then I will be going over through your questions. But you can write them as I'm going through the presentation. You can enter them, but I will be reading them at the end of the dictionary. The next prompt, it is the bill on. The entry findings into these, the entry defined within this dictionary will determine at what point we will be sending over the billing information to our billing and account receivable application. The received, this will say or instruct the system to send the billing the billing information over to BAR based on the receive date for the specimen. And if we enter specimen, then we are sending the billing information over to BAR based on the specimen date. Default priority, at this prompt you have to identify a priority that you want the system to default when you are entering a requisition for this specimen type. And turnaround hours, this is the number of hours that it would take for the pathology department to complete entering findings for a particular specimen type. The next prompt are the end-to-edit requisition data section and the end-to-edit findings data section. These two prompts are fairly similar. The first one will determine the different data sections that will be defaulted when you are entering a requisition for a surgical specimen type in this case. And in end-to-edit findings data section, you are listing all the different types of data sections that you want to be available for entering findings in end-to-edit findings routine. That is page 1. Page 2. other data section. So as you go through with Meditech and you may be making some changes into your pathology department and the workflow. Maybe at one point you want different data sections from the end findings not longer to be used. So in order for you not to corrupt any specimens that currently have used these type of data sections, our recommendation is that you will remove it from page 1, such as I did, and you will go on page 2 and you will enter that data section that you deleted, that you removed it from there. So that data section will still be associated with the specimen type, but will no longer appear into the end-to-end findings routine. The next section that I'll go over, it is the EMR report. Into this section over here determines what would be the report that will be used to send over the findings into EMR. So we have the department, and we can have different departments that we can associate it with a pathology case or pathology specimen type. We can have the surgical one. We can have the A department, or we can have a list of different departments over here. And for each department, we can have a different report to be sent out to EMR when the case is signed out and when the case is preliminary sign out. If this prompt over here is left blank, then the system will take a look into the report formats that are defined into our customer-defined parameters. I will just touch base at this point and tell you guys what is the hierarchy that the system determines what report format will be used, but Alicia will go more into details into this prompt within pathology customer-defined parameters. As I said, if in pathology specimen type you have no reports defined, then the system will come over here and will say, for each of these prefixes, what is the report format that will be sent over to EMR when the specimen is sign out or preliminary sign out. And if these two prompts over here in these two columns are left blank, then the system will take a look at the default and will say, what is the report that will be used again to send over to EMR? If nothing is defaulted in here either, then we do have a standard report format that will be default under the sign out, which is .hub.pth. So this is the hierarchy that the system determines what is the report format to be sent out to EMR. So let's get back into pathology specimen type. We have the label format section. Here we have the different label formats that will be used for specimens and slides, and to print also specimen barcoded label and slides barcode labels. If there is nothing defined into the label format dictionary, if there is not any format defined into the label format section over here, then the system will take a look into the label format dictionary within LIS shared one label printer dictionary. Sorry. The next prompt, it is the inquiry report. Into this prompt, you would have to identify the report that will be used to display the related findings for a surgical specimen type. Under the require for sign out, in this prompt, it is a lookup into our pathology data section dictionary. So at this prompt, you would have to identify any data section for which you want some type of findings entered before you can allow a user to sign out a case. So with this setup currently for a specimen, for a surgical specimen type, you need to enter some kind of findings into a final diagnosis data section before you can sign out the case. Otherwise, there will be a hard-coded error message saying that you need to enter findings into the SD data section. And then the next prompt is allow preliminary signature, yes or no. If you want to allow a preliminary signature, even though there's no findings entered for this data section, enter yes. If you do not want to allow a preliminary signature, if there are no findings entered for this particular data section, then enter no. And last but not least, we have page 3. We have Q for MIS signed documents. Again, this prompt is a lookup into the pathology data section dictionary. Excuse me. So this is a lookup into our pathology data section dictionary. So if you have a data section defined in here, as soon as you will enter findings within this data section, then the system will automatically queue this data section into the MIS signed documents. Within pathology desktop dictionary, within pathology dictionary desktop, we do have a routine that is called MIS signed documents. And then for these data section that is defined in here, whether or not you want to require the dictated by signature for signing out the case. Yes, if you want to require the dictated by signature. No, if you do not want to require the dictated by signature for these data section. And then the next two prompts, fairly similar. If we want any tissues or procedures to be defaulted immediately as soon as we place an order for a pathology case, then you would have to identify the tissue or the procedure at the appropriate prompt. This is a lookup into our pathology medical term dictionary, but these are only the tissue type terms that we are defining. And then the next prompt, it is a lookup again to the same dictionary, but this will be for the procedure type, as it is mentioned on the top of the screen. So I do see that there are a few questions. I will be reading through these questions because these concludes the setup or the training for the pathology specimen type dictionary. So I will be going over through the different questions you guys have been writing in chat and provide you with an answer, or if I would need to follow up with you, I will do so as well. So if you do have any questions, please let us know. So we do have a question, which also Alicia has been trying to, and she has replied to the questions that we have received from Jason. So his first question was, can you cross specimen types such as surgical and cytology on the duplicate name check? And it also further clarifies that it is a CLAP requirement to correlate cytology findings with any surgical confirmation. Presently, our system forces to manually match this up. It could be handy to use alert of a second specimen by Meditech. Can the duplicate check cross the cytology and the surgical divided? So Alicia has provided with an answer as well, saying that you could duplicate check if these are within the same department and use the department level duplicate checking. So if the cytology and the surgical specimens are associated with the same pathology department, as I mentioned, you could use the duplicate checking that is set up in the pathology department dictionary. However, if it is really specific, if your questions are specific to the setup you guys currently have into your system, it would be better if we can address them into a task with your specialist. They will also let us know since we are presenting the pathology module today, so they will also let us know, and we can open tasks and assist them further with your questions. So Alicia, I'm sorry for not pronouncing correctly. Ashley McKenna is saying, if no defaults are set up on page 3 of the specimen type dictionary for MISQ sign, are they defined in the customer defined parameters? As I mentioned, the page 3 is not a default. The findings or the data sections entered on that prompt will queue the MIS or will queue the cases to appear into the MISQ sign. However, there are access that will determine whether or not cases will appear into the MISQ sign routine, for which Alicia will be going over after we are done with the pathology dictionaries. But page 3, it's to cue, or it's an indication when a certain case will appear into the MISQ sign, and it is not a default. So if that does not answer your question, Ashley, please, if you could please provide with us with a clarification as to what you mean as the default set on page 3. It looks like we do not have any questions at this point. So before I can continue with the next dictionary, I do understand that you guys might be a little bit tired. So we'll take a 5-minute break and come back at 2:55 Eastern Standard Time to continue with the next dictionary. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I will be resuming our training, and we'll go over through the next dictionary, which is the Pathology Medical Term Dictionary. The pathway to get to Pathology Medical Term Dictionary, it is ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, pathology, medical terms, enter edit. And there are different term types that we can define through this dictionary. I will be going over through 7 of them, which would be tissues, procedures, QC procedures, diseases, morphologies, and classified and other procedures. The Pathology Medical Term Dictionary is used to define all tissues, procedures, morphologies, diseases, and other pathology medical terms that could be added during pathology requisition or findings entry. This dictionary is also used to allow a quick and efficient way to search for specimen using a coding entry. So first of all, we'll start with the tissue term type and see how that is being defined. As I mentioned for the data section dictionary, if there are any prompts that are grayed out, that means that does not apply to the type that we are defining through this dictionary. And sometimes you will also notice that there are pages that do not apply to certain term types. So we'll start first with the tissue term type, and that's the appendix 1. We have set it up to active yes or no. At the concept prompt, you would enter the mnemonic of the concept that relates to this medical term type, and this field will automatically populate after you synchronize the concepts with the pathology medical term routine. This prompt is only used if you are using the SNOMED. Currently, I do not have the SNOMED defined I do not have the SNOMED loaded into my computer, so that is why I have it as blank. The next prompt will be the preferred terms. At the preferred term prompt, you would have to enter the full-length description of the medical term to use in lookups. And then we do have the abbreviation. You would have to enter the abbreviation for the medical term to use on the report. The abnormal prompt, even though it is currently available and not grayed out, that does not apply to a tissue type. So I will touch base to this prompt whenever it applies, which will be the disease or the morphology type. Then we have the term type, which this prompt is grayed out after the first or the initial file, just to save the integrity of our system, and we see that it is a tissue type. Then we have the follow-up days. At this prompt, you have to enter the number of days after which you want the system to generate a follow-up letter for the patient. And once you enter a number of the days that you want this follow-up to be, the system will ask you to enter the form that will be used to generate the follow-up letter. The negation trigger does not apply at this term type, so we will come at a later time. Then we have the findings category. At the findings category prompt, you would have to enter the findings category to be associated to the case when this medical term is coded. And then we have the nomenclature map, which you would have to identify the nomenclature from, you have to enter the nomenclature code for this pathology medical term. At the code prompt, you'd have to enter the code that should be associated when to the specimen when this medical term is coded. Each term must have a unique string of code. At the marker prompt, you have to enter the marker that should be associated to the specimen when this medical term is coded. If the data section is not set to code, the marker will not be associated. The marker can also be used on management reports statistical reports and on searches. We have the other mnemonic, as we have seen in other dictionaries. You'd have to enter the other mnemonic that can be used for these medical terms. And then we have the specimen type prompt, where you would have to enter the specimen type that can use these medical terms. As I mentioned previously, this prompt also works in conjunction with the accept and restrict terms in pathology specimen type dictionary to limit the available choices when doing a lookup at the medical term from findings entry. The change to prompt. This functionality is used to change the name or the mnemonic of a medical term. So this usually helps very much if you are initially loading the SNOMED into your system, and if certain certain medical terms needs to change the mnemonic, and you want to change it to a mnemonic for which physicians are used to, then what you can do, you can come here. You can change the mnemonic, and you say that my new mnemonic needs to be append, for instance, for appendix. And then before I can click save, I will have to enter the current medical term that is defined, or the current mnemonic. I will have to enter as the other mnemonic. So even if you write it as appendix, then the system will know that you are pulling the appendix tissue. We'll go on page 2. Under the ICD diagnosis, you would have to enter the ICD diagnosis that you want to associate it with this term type that you are defining. The reflex order group does not apply at this time, so I'll skip over and I'll go to the synonym. At this prompt, you'd have to enter the optional synonym that can be used in place of the medical term. If set up to code, this prompt will cause the associated term to code. And then for each of the synonyms that you enter, you can enter a mnemonic that will be used for this synonym. And then we have the cross-reference term. The setup into the cross-reference terms will determine how the codes or if there will be any other coding when you are entering when certain terms are being identified within the same line. So, for instance, if the system sees within one line when I'm entering findings into the pathology findings routine, and they see that I'm using two different terms, such as abdomen and appendix, within one line, then at the cross-reference data section, the description of appendicitis will be defaulting in. Or the same way, if I'm saying inflammation in appendix within findings entry, then the description that will be defaulting into the cross-reference data section will be appendicitis. And then page 3, we have certain information that will be available or required within the edit requisition. Again, if we do need to capture additional information via customer-defined screens for certain tissue types or medical terms, we would have to identify that CDS under the order screen prompt. Ask tissue ID. It is a yes or no prompt. If you want the system to ask users to enter a tissue ID when they are entering tissues in the edit requisition, enter yes. Otherwise, enter no. If you enter no, then the start with ID prompt will be grayed out and will not be available. Ask tissue description. It is again a yes or no prompt. If you want the system to ask user to enter a tissue description for each tissue, enter yes. Otherwise, enter no. The start ID with has two options, number 1 and letter A. If you enter number 1, then that means that you are going to assign only only numbers to the IDs for the tissues. Otherwise, if you enter A, then you are going to use alpha characters to assign IDs to the tissues entered into edit requisition. Again, if there is any default priority that you want to default the priority prompt in edit requisition, Once this term type is being identified, then you would have to enter it at this prompt. Turnaround hours, you would have to enter the number of hours that it will take for the histology department to complete the appendix tissue through the histology process. If there are certain procedures that you need the system to default in and to edit requisition, once this medical term type or this issue is being identified, you'll have to identify that procedure into the default procedure prompt. The next prompt over here will determine which data section will be used. If they will be using the .hist2 data section or if it will be using the .hist data section. With the current setup, looks like it will be using the .hist data section. I'm sorry, the .hist2 data section, and it has a greater detail. However, if I clear that out, then I will have the availability to determine at this point which data section will be used. And if I'm just entering information under the process histology default with blocks to 5 and levels to 2, that will be default. That information, block 5, level 2, is what will appear in the .hist data section. But if I want additional greater details, then I can say I want to use blocks A through D, and I want to use it for 4 levels of them. Once I click enter, the system will automatically create the levels under this section over here. And we'll see we have block A, level 1, block A, level 2, level 3, 4, and then it will go to the next block, block B, block C, and block D. This is how you define a tissue term type. The next term type that we will take a look, it will be the procedure one, and I will be using the pap smear. Again, the information on page 1 remains the same, besides the term type that is set up to procedure. At this point, we have all pages that are different. Also, the term type defines how the pages 2, 3, and 4 will look like, as a lot of them are similar, but in this case, or certain prompts are not available. In this case, for a procedure such as the pap smear, we do have availability on page 2, but still we do not have available for any reflex order groups. On page 3 now, it looks like similar to what we have seen on page 3 for the lab test dictionary, where we would define how the billing will be done. So we have a bill code, which is a lookup into our bar procedure dictionary, where we define the bill code that will be sent over to bar. And then we have the charge, which is the dollar amount charge that we will be charging for a certain procedure. If there is any rule that needs to be evaluated before sending the charges over to bar, please identify the charge rule into the charge rule prompt. And then for each of the bill codes, we will have the alternate code and the alternate code type that will be defaulting in. The duplicate hours, it's fairly similar to what we have seen previously. You would have to enter the number of hours for which the system will check for a duplicate order for this procedure. Reportable prompt, yes or no. If these procedures would be reportable and print on the external report, please enter yes. Otherwise, enter no. Confidential, yes or no. If this procedure should be marked as confidential and be available only to those users that have a proper access, please enter yes. Otherwise, if this procedure is not being considered as confidential, enter no. Complete on order. It is a yes or no prompt. So basically, this will determine whether or not a certain procedure will be marked as complete upon ordering it. If I set it up to yes, then as soon as I will file the requisition, this procedure will be considered as complete. Otherwise, if I mark it as no, the user will have to manually go in the .ppc data section and will mark the procedure as complete before can sign out the case. The department, if you look up into our pathology department dictionary, if you want to associate a certain department with a particular medical term type, then you would have to identify that department over here. The outreach requisition is yes or no prompt. If you want a certain procedure term type to be able to be ordered from outreach, then enter yes. Otherwise, if certain procedures cannot be ordered from outreach, please enter no. The ask order count, if you want the system to ask the order count for how many Pap smear procedures are you ordering on a patient, enter yes. Otherwise, enter no. And once you set up this prompt to yes, the system will say what will be the default count, which can be 1 or it can be 2, similar to what we have seen it before. And then again, if we have any other any customer-defined screens to use to capture additional information when a Pap smear procedure is being ordered, please enter it in here. The slide count, this is the number of slides that will be assigned to this procedure, and the system will use when calculating the slides that have been read for a particular pathology case. If there is any order rules that needs to be evaluated upon ordering of these procedures in end-to-edit pathology requisition, please identify those order rules into this prompt. And then the last section, it is to capture the order workload. So if there is any workload that needs to be captured upon ordering a certain procedure, please identify the workload subsection at the subsection prompt. And for each of the subsections, you would have to identify the workload code that will be used and the count for how many times this workload will be multiplied when capturing the workload upon ordering. If there are any user notes that needs to be available internal, only to provide instructions for internal pathology users only, then you would have to enter these notes over here. It's the same user note as available on page 9 of the lab test dictionary or page 7 of microprocedures. Page 4, fairly similar to what we have seen it before as well. We have, because this is the procedure and we need to set it up as to where it will be performed. So you need to identify a performing site, such as in this case will be main lab. If you are going to send this procedure to a reference lab and you have the transcriptionist, the pathology transcriptionist suite, and you want to send orders to a reference lab, please identify the appropriate reference code and result code into the appropriate field. If this procedure can be ordered only to certain sites, if you are a facility with if you are a hospital with multiple sites and only certain sites can order it, then you would have to list those ordering sites into this prompt. Otherwise, you leave it blank and this procedure can be ordered from everywhere. If you had multiple performing sites over here, such as Quest, for instance, then I would have available the site rule prompt. Here you will have to identify any rules that will be evaluated to determine what would be the performing site based on certain conditions. For instance, you can say for patients with medical terms, I need to, for patients with Medicare, I want the performing site to be Quest. But for patients with, and this might not be the best example, but this will be the different conditions that when we would probably like to change the performing site. And then we have the professional fee code. This is the code that the pathologist will be charging the hospital for a certain procedure. And then the professional fee, this is the fee and the dollar amount fee that the pathologist will charge the hospital for a certain procedures. For these two, for the professional fee, we do have a report that you can pull up to see a list of the professional fee. So if we go ancillary, laboratory system operations, and then billing, and then report, we do have the pathology professional fee list that you can compile. These professional fee lists can be compiled based on based on an activity day range as well as the user, the sign-out user. So let's get back into pathology medical term dictionary, and then this section over here is to further narrow or to specify when what procedure is being ordered under certain conditions. For instance, if you are if pap smear was not just one procedure, but it was the profile containing other procedures, then I would come and build the profile as I would do on page 5 of the lab test dictionary, when I was creating one profile, but I do not want to copy it from anywhere. And from here, I can choose the different component procedures that I want to be ordered when I'm ordering a pap smear. So this is another lookup into our pathology medical term for the procedure term type, and I can choose the different ones. If I have set it up like that, and then I say I do have a different one, like if I had different profiles, then I would have available the default profile prompt, where if I perform a lookup, I will have the different profiles created over here just a little bit above. And then if there is if certain doctors or any of these selections, such as the doctor, facility, location, slide, or vendor, use different of these different profiles that what we have as the default, then we can do so and narrow it down and say, well, whenever the doctor, the submitting doctor is Dr. Elena, then I want the profile to be defaulted as 0418. So whatever components I have associated with the second profile is what will be defaulted as the profile whenever the doctor, submitting doctor, is the one that is defined under this value. So this is the procedure type. The other type that we'll take a look is the QC procedure. So we'll do the QC term type, which is the incision and drainage quality control. As you see, the term type is QC. The rest of the page, the rest of the information on page 1 remains the same, as well as on page 2. On page 3, the only thing that we don't have accessible at this point, it is the billing section, because we do not charge for QC specimens. And then on page 3 as well, we do not have anything, page 4, we do not have anything available either. The next term type we'll take a look will be a disease term type. And we'll choose the appendicitis as the term type. At this point, I will mention the functionality, or it's where the abnormal prompt comes into handy, and we can mark as if a certain disease it is abnormal or not. Because this is a disease, obviously it is abnormal, so I'll mark it as yes. The negation trigger still does not apply. It is a disease. It is a disease term type. Rest of the information on page 1 remains the same. And then on page 2 remains the same. But however, at this point, we have the reflex order group, which we can reflect upon this procedure. We can reflect upon this term type, or whenever we are identifying and coding this medical term type, we can reflect happening upon it, because it is a disease one. And then page 3 and 4 are not available. Similar to this one, we have the morphology term types, such as inflammation. Again, we have the abnormal prompt set it up to yes. We have the term set it up as to more. The rest of information on page 1 remains the same. And on page 2, we still have the availability to reflect upon, an order group as soon as we have the system detects this term type. And then page 3 and page 4 are not accessible. The next term type that we have is the unclassified one, such as the no sign off. And if you, so this is unclassified one, and at this point, it is the only term type that will give us accessible under the negation trigger prompt. This prompt, it is yes or no prompt. If this unclassified term type is being considered to negate the trigger of the coding, then enter yes. Otherwise, if it will not negate the trigger of the coding between terms, it will say no. What do I mean? Well, if I'm using the word inflammation, if you paid attention a little bit earlier, if I'm entering the terms of inflammation and appendix within one line, the system will code those two medical terms and will default appendicitis. Well, if I use the term type of no sign and I say appendix, no sign of inflammation in appendix, then because this prompt is set up to yes, no coding will be done and no description of appendicitis will be defaulted in the cross-reference data section. So that is what the negation trigger does. And then the rest of the information on page 1 and 2 remains the same. We no longer have available the reflex order group. And page 3 and 4 are not accessible. Sometimes when you are loading SNOMED into the system, you might see term types marked as other procedure. These might be another procedure that is being part of the SNOMED, but if you want to use like the clinical diagnosis as a procedure, there is a way how you can change a term type from other procedure to a regular procedure. So currently, as you see, I have available only page 1 and page 2. If I go within the system and I go dictionaries, pathology, medical terms, and quick edit, I can use this quick edit to change another procedure to a regular pathology procedure, but I can make also different other changes. For instance, if I enter my mnemonics range, which can be the entire name of the term type or just the mnemonic of it, and say clinical, and have listed all the term types, now the system will default over here and will list all the medical term types from from APP to clinical, and then from here it will default also the type of the medical term, and from here I can inactivate them or make them active or inactive, mark them as abnormal. Now if I scroll down to my clinical tissue, which is another procedure, it is the only one that has this pathology procedure prompt available, which I can mark it as yes. So this will make it possible so I can change the clinical from another procedure to a regular procedure. And then the edit prompt, it is a yes or no prompt. At this moment, I can say yes, I want to make the edit, and this will branch me over, as you can see, into the pathology medical term dictionary. But unlike before, from another procedure, it got changed to a regular procedure, and now I have access over to page 3 and page 4. Once I enter the information on page 3 and page 4, I can file it, and now my clinical medical term change from another procedure to a regular procedure. This concludes the dictionaries for the pathology, for a pathology case. Obviously, we do have the other dictionaries that Alicia will go over, but before I can conclude my portion of the training, I will branch over really quickly to see how all these dictionaries are tied together when we are placed from the beginning, when a order for a pathology case is in place until it's being resolved. In the meantime, if you do have any questions regarding to all of the dictionaries that I went over from pathology department, data section, specimen type, and medical term types, please let us know in our Q&A section or the chat while we see how everything is being tied together. So from the pathology desktop, I will come into the requisition, and I have the requisition enter edit. And I will be identifying my patient. The system will be searching for the patient. Once I identify the correct one, I will enter the new procedure. The next prompt is specimen type, and it is a lookup into the pathology specimen type dictionary where I choose my specimen type. And because I had only one department defined for that specimen type, that is why it's grayed out at this point and it immediately default to the department F. The received date and time will default to the day and now, but it can be changed and it is required. The next specimen number is set up to next, and this default because of the customer defined parameters that Alicia will be going over in a little bit. The received by is the user that is signed on, and obviously I'm signed on as Meditech, so that is why I have that immediately defaulted. Because of the specimen type on page 1 of the prompt, I had the specimen date required. That is why there is an asterisk next to the specimen date, which is requiring me to enter a specimen date. I can enter a specimen time if I want to, if there is, oops, sorry. It has to be the same as the receive date. And then I have, if there is any workload function that needs to be captured now that I'm ordering this specimen type, I can identify the workload function over here. The label device, if I want to print a specimen label, I will need to identify the printer at this prompt, at this label device prompt. If I want to assign it to a pathologist, this case, then I will have to enter the pathologist into the assign to prompt. The tissue, this is a lookup into our medical term dictionary, but it is only to the tissue lookup. So at this point, I can choose which medical term, which tissue I need to enter it. And obviously, I will do it for the appendix. Why not? Because the appendix tissue had required the user require ID set to A on page 3 of the pathology medical term dictionary. That's why it's defaulting to A. And also because it was set up to alpha characters rather than numbers. I can enter a description if I want to, but I will not do it at this time. If you do remember on page 3 of the tissue in medical term type, we did have the procedure to be defaulted immediately, such as the gastric biopsy. That is why we have only one defaulted at this point. But for the specimen type, if you notice on page 3 of the specimen type dictionary, I had a default procedure. That is where the HE stain is coming from. And then the count depends on how I set it up, the count for each of these procedures into the medical term dictionary. On page 2, I wanted to point out the slide count prompt. This prompt is grayed out, but we have the number 13. You're saying you maybe are wondering where those are coming from. Those will be coming from the procedures and the slide prompt that was on page 3 of the medical term type for each of the procedures. And also based on the count that I have, the system will automatically calculate the number of the slide count for it. Any screens, customer-defined screens associated with the specimen type will be defaulted into this portion over here. Again, if I had any procedure notes identified, as you notice on page 3, I will have them available over here, such as this one, which are the procedure notes that are intended to stay internal. Once I have all the information entered, I will click save, and then I will file the requisition for my patient. I do apologize, it's a little bit slow, but here are any additional information, different data sections available for the enter-edit requisition. If you remember from page 1 of the specimen type dictionary, if I have none, I can just close out and my specimen will be generated, and I can enter my findings for it. To enter the findings, I'll go into the enter findings routine, identify my patient, press enter. Once I identify the specimen, the data sections available within this routine are also coming from the specimen type. So this is the gross description. And now if you remember, the dictated by is set up in the data section dictionary. It is requiring me to enter the data section or to who is dictating these findings for these data sections. So I'm going to say there is no So once I enter my gross description, I can click File. This is a free type data section. That is why this is a editor. At this point, let's just go back to this point. So at this point, I can have the options to just bold it. This is the question to one of the questions that you guys asked, whether or not I have the ability to bold out the diagnosis. It will have to be manual at this point. So this is the way how you'll do it if you're using Meditor. And then I'll go to the histology. If you see here, I have the .hist2 data section, and this is defaulting immediately depending on the tissue, the appendix tissue and how I've set it up. So I'm going to do blocks A through C with 2 levels per each. Once I press enter, I have my blocks, whether or not they are frozen, and then the pieces, the different, how many pieces I have for each of the blocks. And for each of the levels that are generated down below here, I can have the procedures. And I can have the procedure of GM defined it for the first one. After that, once I enter all my information for histology processing, I'll click Save, and I'll move on into the next data section. Again, this is another free type data section, as well as for final diagnosis. The clinical history is another free type data section. An addendum, if I want to enter an addendum at this point, because the specimen is at the micro status and it's not signed out, I don't have any access to do so. So the specimen needs to be signed out in order for me to add the addendum. I'll go to the next prompt, which is the .com. This is the comments data section where I can enter information or any comments regarding to the case. And then I can go to the next one. The next data section, it is a cross-reference data section. Here is where I have the appendix and no tissues. This is where I would be, where all the information, if I had the coding of appendix and inflammation, where the description of appendicitis will be defaulting in. If I would had another radiology order for this patient, I could have linked it through this .its data section. I have the codes listed over here, which is the .ct. I have my markers data section, .mrk data section. This is the pathology procedures that lists only the procedures that I ordered on the case. And then I have the procedures complete, which, as you can see, I have many procedures ordered for the case, but not all of them are completed, which means that the complete upon order on page 3 of the medical term type is not set up to yet. So before I can before I can mark them as sign out, if I try to say that I want to sign it out, I have two error messages should be defaulting in. The first one would be the following data section must be resolved prior to sign out. This is page 2 of the specimen type dictionary. So if I would come to final diagnosis and I enter, oops. So once I enter the final diagnosis, which is the FC data section, at this point, I'll give it another try. You see that I'm evaluating, the reflex is evaluating because this is a disease term type. The reflex is being happening. So it says an issue charge has been added. I will close it out. And if I try at this point to sign out the case, I should be getting another error message saying that some of the procedures are not complete. Please use the edit findings button. So I can cancel out of it and I can still continue further and sign out the case. Obviously, I will review the report and I can sign out the case at this point. But I could go back, mark those procedures as complete before I can sign out my case. So that would be, I would come over to the procedures completed, and I will mark the rest of the procedures as completed. Now, before I can continue and pass my presentation over to Alicia, I do want to touch base upon the data sections where I mentioned when to use the checkmark prompt from the data section on the .hist2 data section. So if I come under the histology prompt and I identify my specimen, and I click save, so this is my specimen, and over here, down below is where I can edit the blocks, the preps, levels, and stains. So if I highlight my specimen and I say edit the blocks, in order for me to go into the next prompt, I need to mark or that use from the data section if I have it still open, which I don't. But for your for demonstration, I will be showing up in a little bit. So we're talking about this use checkmark field to yes. So if I am back into my pathology desktop, and I have my block, which is A through CO2. If I don't mark anything in here and I just click save and I say file changes and go to the next screen, the system will go, but nothing should show up. So I've got some of the blocks and the pieces, but not all of them. If I go back, and because this is the diagnosis and blocks, so if I go back into here and I mark the blocks as completed yes, then I should see A through C with 2 levels appearing into the next level. So this is what is related that blocks complete or the usage of the check mark field into the histology processing. So now I can continue any further and I can mark, so if I mark only one of the blocks as completed and I save and go to the next level, then only one of them. So only one of those blocks that are marked as completed are appearing into the next level. And so on, I will need to use this check mark before I can continue to the next level. If you guys have any questions in how for all the material covered until now, please let me know. I will be going over, yes, so there are 2 questions that are asked. The first one, it is, can you default in a label device in the enter edit screen? And if so, where it is set up? The default of the different devices that you can have into here is, if I'm not mistaken, will be into the client location dictionary. Just bear with me for a second. There are 2, I would have to go back into client location. There are 2 prompts that it can be determined, so bear with me, guys. The first one will be client location, and if I don't see, there will be the default. Oops, my client is not set up at this point. Let's see. Yep, I have not defined in the universe my client, so I do apologize for that. But if I have my client, so under the usage should probably be my, because usually those defaults are based on the client location. However, we would need to follow up with you. I will do another check, but I do apologize if I don't find it at this point. Maybe I will follow up with you to find where exactly you will define that that label device. So let's take a look now. So I'm thinking that probably, but I will have to look further, will be this one. But yeah, we have just the workload function. So I will need to follow up with you as to where we can define the label device to defaulting in edit requisition. So the next question from Adrian is, could you please show up how to unsign a case? Thank you. This is a good question. First of all, before you can even unassign a case, you need to have proper access to it. And what I mean by proper access, Alicia will go over more into details about it, but I will just show to you guys. First of all, you need to have access. So let's go page 7. I'm under the all access, so on page 7. In order to unassign a case, you need to have access over to can remove signature. So if this prompt is for a user that is listed under the user prompt on page 1, if that user has access or has this prompt can remove signature to yes, then you can definitely remove the signature or unassign a case. How you could do it, so if you go, oops, nope, that is not the right one. Let's just go back into our pathology case. And I will really quickly just sign out the case for you guys. I did not sign out my case, but I will do it so. Basically the same sign and unsign will be within the same routine. So either to sign it or to unassign a case, you still have to be within the sign routines. And I had my case 52. We will go through all the checks. I checked out my prompt, and now I will sign out with the date of today, change status. So now I signed my case. Because I have access to unassign it, I will just come back. Oops. Yep, I reviewed it. Here I will say I want to remove the signature, and then what is the reason for removing it? Pathology signed in error. You can see quick save, and then that's how you can sign out sign out a case. And then you can just go back into the signing out routine, pull up the finding entry routine, pull up the same case, and you will notice now it went to the status that it was before it got to a sign out case or to a sign out status. Do you guys have any other questions? Let's see. Okay. If you guys don't have any other questions, we can continue with the next We'll take a 5-minute break so I can switch over with Alicia before she can take over. Thank you guys for being patient and for joining us. So stay tuned for the next, for the rest of the 2 dictionaries, which should not be too long. Thank you guys.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for waiting. We're going to get started again. Again, my name is Alicia McDonough, and I'm also a lab application specialist, and I'm going to be covering the prompt dictionary, the questionnaire dictionary, and then the path access settings and the path customer defined parameters. So the first dictionary I'm going to be going over today is the prompt dictionary. So the prompt dictionary is where you can build prompts or questions to be used in pathology questionnaires. The questionnaires are assigned to appropriate data sections for use in findings entry. Just some key points about the prompt dictionary. You can use the same prompt on multiple questionnaires. You can restrict responses on certain prompt types. You can flag prompt responses for the exception report. And on certain prompt types, you can define define default responses in order to save keystrokes. And you can also define responses as abnormal. And so now I'm going to jump over into the system. So our pathway to our prompt dictionary is similar to the other ones. We're going to go ancillary, lab, dictionaries, pathology, and then this is our prompt dictionary. And there are several different types of prompts you can define. I'm going to go over most of them. There's a date type, a free text, assigned decimal, integer, time, yes or no, and those ones I'm all going to go over individually. And then there's also a path medical term type. This one I'm not going to show for today, but it will basically is just used to get codes from medical terms that are defined in questionnaires. And as we go through the dictionary, I'm going to be skipping the fields that Lorena has already gone over, such as our name and our mnemonic and active and name fields. And then in each type, there are certain fields that are going to be grayed out and inaccessible. I'll skip those as well and come back to them for the prompt types they're accessible for. So the first type I'm going to go over is the free text type. So as you can see here, this is where we can define our data type. So as I said, there's a free, a yes, no, integer, assigned decimal, date, time, and the path medical terms. So this is defined as a free type. Our next field available is our max length field. So this is where you're going to define the width of the field, the width of the response field in characters. So you're giving this prompt a total of 70 characters in length. Our next field is our required field. This is a yes or no field. If you set this to yes, this prompt will be required to be answered in the questionnaire. If you set it to no, it will not. And then we're going to jump over to page 2. So this is a prompt type where you can restrict your answers. So up here we have our restrict to answers below. This is a yes or no field. If you enter yes here, users will only be able to use these answers that are defined in this space below here. If you enter no, they'll be able to use these answer codes plus enter in any free text that will fit in the response field. Next field, we have our code field. So this is going to be our abbreviated answer code for the free text data type response field. So this is the short form of your full answer. And then you have your expanded answer text field. So this is where you're going to write out the full answer for this prompt. The length of this is determined by that max length field that we saw on the previous page. And on this type, you can define abnormal. So we have our abnormal field. This is going to be a yes or no field. If you set this to no, then this answer code will not be flagged as abnormal. If you set it to yes, then this will be considered an abnormal response. Again, we have another place to link findings category. So if you are using findings categories and you would like to link any of these codes to a finding category, you can associate the pathology findings category here. If you're using workload function, you can assign workload function here. And if you are using follow-up days, you can define the number of days after the specimen has been signed out in which you'd like the system to generate a follow-up letter for this patient. Once you define the days, you'll have your follow-up form field available. This is going to be a lookup to our LIS forms, and you would define the follow-up form you wanted to associate with this answer code. We're also able to set up reflexes off these answer codes. So here we have our reflex order groups. This is going to be a lookup to our LIS order group dictionary, and you can define any order groups you would like to reflex on. As you can see, you can do this for each code that's defined. So here you can see the top line is highlighted and our reflex order group is highlighted down here. So these order groups defined here would be for this top row answer code here. If you want to do it for the next one, you'd have to click through so that this row was highlighted and you get your reflex order groups highlighted down here. Here we're also able to define a default response. So if you define a default response, when this prompt is entered into in a questionnaire, this response that's defined here will default in. However, it can be backed out and a different code can be put in. If you want to assign default workload to this prompt, you would assign that workload here. And if you have any documentation, this is a free text field, so if you want to associate any documentation with this prompt, you would type that in here. The next type of prompt data type I'm going to go over is a date type. So here you can see the data type is defined as date. Our maximum length field is grayed out and set to 8. This is because for a date type field, it's looking for 2 characters for the month, 2 characters for the day, and 2 characters for the year, so a total of 8 characters for the entire date. Again, we're able to set this as required, yes or no. And on page 2, the only field we're going to have available is our default workload function. So if you'd like to assign workload function to that, you do that here, and any documentation you can define down here as well. Next, we have a time type. So this is similar to the date type. Instead of looking for a date, it's looking for a time. So our data type is defined as time. Our max length field is again grayed out, and it's automatically set to 4 because the system is expecting 2 characters for the hour and 2 characters for the minute for a total of 4 characters. We can set this as required, yes or no. And then again on page 2, we're only going to be able to define default workload function or documentation for this type. The next type is a signed decimal type. So here our data type is set to SDEC for signed decimal, and we now have our precision field available. The precision field is where you're going to define the decimal precision allowed for this field. The number can be from 0 to 9. This is set at 2, so that means that it's going to give you 2 decimal places after the period for this type of for this prompt response. Again, we can define our maximum length and required. The maximum length does include the precision or the decimal places as well. And then over here, these fields are now going to be available. This is going to work similar to, you would see like a T-type numeric lab test. You can set low limit, which is going to be the low limit for this number, a low normal. So this is where you can define your normal range. You would set a low normal and a high normal, and then you can also set a high limit. The other thing you're able to define on here is a reference range of sorts. So in these next fields, you can pick a from and through range. And for that specific range, you can define a workload function, a findings category, follow-up days, and follow-up forms. And then you can also define reflex order groups. So this is now going to work similar to that free text type prompts with the codes, except you can associate this for a specific range. And then on page 2, we're going to have our default response available. So if you'd like to default in a response, do that here, our workload function and documentation. Also to note for the signed decimal type, this can accept positive or negative numbers. The next type is going to be an integer type. So our data type here is going to be defined as INT for integer. This is for positive or negative whole numbers only. So our precision field is not going to be available, so this won't accept a decimal. And then all the rest of the fields are going to work the same as the signed decimal type. So we have our length and our required fields. You can set your low limits, normals, and high limits. You can set your reference ranges again with the workload functions, categories, follow-up days, and reflex order groups. And then we do have one additional field here on page 1. This is the workload multiplier field. This is a free text field. It's only available for integer data type. It's a yes or no field. If you enter yes here, it will use the response in this field as a multiplication factor of the associated workload. So if you enter yes here, and the answer to this prompt is 2, we'll multiply the workload by 2. If it's 3, we'll multiply it by 3. If you enter no, it's not going to multiply the workload at all. And then again, on page 2, we're going to have the same prompts available, the default response, our workload function, and any documentation. And the last type of prompt we have available is the yes or no type. So our data type is YN for this one. Again, we're going to see that our max length field is grayed out. This is because the system is looking for only one character, a Y for yes or an N for no. We can set it as required, and then we can also do just a default response, default workload function, or documentation. And that concludes the prompt dictionary. I'm going to pause just a moment to see if anyone has any questions, and then if not, we'll move on to the questionnaire dictionary. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and enter them into the chat or the Q&A now. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions about the prompt dictionary, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the questionnaire dictionary. So our questionnaire dictionary is used to design questionnaires for appropriate data sections, which would be a questionnaire type data section that Lorena had gone over earlier. There are 2 types of questionnaires you can do: a patient questionnaire, which is a single page of questions and displayed information, or you can do a group questionnaire, which is a set of several separate patient questionnaires combined into one group questionnaire. Some key points about the questionnaire dictionary is that a response to a questionnaire prompt can automatically branch the user to another questionnaire. Questionnaires can be used to display certain past information from the system. Prompts and responses can print in a variety of different prompts and graphics when printed to a laser printer. Users are able to define your report formats using the NPR report writer application. And the questions on a questionnaire and the length of the response field are first defined in the past prompt dictionary, as we just saw with our max length field. And questionnaires are accessed directly from the findings entry routine, and I'll show you a brief overview of the questionnaire once we go through the dictionary. So again, I'm going to jump back over into the system. And again, our pathway is going to be very similar. We have ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, pathology. This time we're going to go into our questionnaire dictionary, and I'm going to go and enter edit. One thing I do want to point out, as you'll see when I pull up the questionnaire, existing questionnaire, enter edit with an existing questionnaire and patient data, and this is correct. You wouldn't want to edit or make any changes to a questionnaire that's already been in use with previous patients. You'd want to inactivate it and create a new questionnaire and reassociate that to the correct data section. So again, we have our mnemonic active field. Instead of name, we have a title field, but that's going to work very similar to your name field. This is going to be the title of your questionnaire. Here we have our type field. As you can see, this is grayed out. Once you have chosen whether this is going to be a patient or a questionnaire type, that field is inaccessible and you cannot change it. If this had been a group type questionnaire, you would have access to our component questionnaires field down here. Here you would be able to do a lookup to patient type questionnaires and pull those in, and then associate a tab name for each questionnaire, so that way you can click through the group questionnaire and each individual patient questionnaire and findings entry. Back up top here, we have our max row size, so very similar to our maximum length in the prompt dictionary. This is the maximum number of characters that will determine the width of the questionnaire. Next, we have our print and tables field. This is a yes or no field. If you select yes here, it will print the questionnaire without tables. If you enter no, it will print the questionnaire with tables. If it's blank, it's going to take that as no, so if this is blank, it will also print it with tables. And then our next field are our font defaults for Metadata and Microsoft Word. So here you can define a default font and size for either your Metadata document or your MS Word. If you're using MS Word, you can also link your MS Word document for the report here in this doc name field. And then we also have an edit field on both of these. So the Edit field, you have 4 responses. If you choose yes here, it's going to let you edit how the questionnaire displays from Metadata or MS Word report. If you want to no, you cannot edit the questionnaire for this format. If you choose reinitialize, it will reinitialize the questionnaire and reload it for this format. And if you choose expunge, it will expunge or delete this questionnaire for this format. I'm going to click yes just so you can kind of see what this looks like. So basically, it just kind of gives you an overview of what the questionnaire looks like in the document and the setup and the placement of what's in there. I'm going to skip over to our picture tab. So the picture tab is really where you kind of build the nitty-gritty of these questionnaires. This top field up here is free text. So you can free text in any text you want, and then you're going to associate these @ signs. So what these do are these give you your fields down here. As you can see, they're not directly in numerical order. We have at 1, at 7, at 8, at 10, at 20. The reason we recommend you build it like this is as you're building the questionnaire, if you do need to make any edits, you have spaces to put in additional fields. As you can see, they line up 1, 7, 8, 10 down here. So if this was 1, 2, and you decided you wanted to add a new field here, you wouldn't be able to add it in that spot, or you'd have to redo the data you had down here for these ones. So we just recommend you space them out so you have enough space. As you can see, if I do press date and add 6, and then click down here, I'm now going to have a field 6 available. So this is how you're going to associate prompts or display any type of information on the questionnaire. So our first field down here is our type field. There's 3 options: a display, a label, or a result. The display type is used to display specific information about the patient or current specimen, such as date, patient name, or age, sex, in a field box by a blue background. Next is a label type. So the label type is going to display the same type of information as a display type, but the text will be indistinguishable from free text. Basically, the text won't be boxed out. And last type is a result type. So this is how you would associate your prompts to this. So I'll show you this as we go through. And also, if you choose a display or a label type, you'll have your element fields available. So this will be a lookup into the available keywords that you can pull in. As you can see, this one up top here is pulling in the patient name. So since I did choose result for this one, I have my prompt field available. So this is going to be a lookup into our pathology prompt dictionary that we just went over. And I did date, so I want to pull in my date type prompt. My length field is now available, so this is the maximum length I want to give to this prompt in the questionnaire. As we saw before, the date type prompt had 8 characters as the maximum length, so I'm going to give this one 8 as well here. And then also with the result types, we can associate if and post rules. So if you were building, you build these in the rule dictionary, and an example is an if rule is based on the prior result. Should this prompt be asked? Would be something of an if rule you could associate to this. Whereas a post rule would be based on this result, take some other action specified in the rule, such as display a message when this prompt is resulted. So those are just some examples of what you can do with if and post rules. And then next we have our new section. Field, this is a yes or no field. If you enter a yes here, it's going to enter a new screen section at that field. This can only be used for result types. If you enter no, no new section is needed. And so that basically works in conjunction down here with these block and block headers. Once I save this, we can reinitialize the screen so you can see a pop-up of what it looks like in the sections and everything. So here you can associate as many block headers, and block row headers if you choose. So the block header is a free text field. You would enter a title for this block, and then you have a block row header, which is again a free text field. The block row header displays outside of the block with a line on either side of it. You can have multiple blocks as block headers within the block row header. That's why you would choose your number, so 1 and 2. So we have 1 block row header, and it's going to encompass both these block headers here. So if I save this and hit check screen, you can see how our sections were broken out. So we have our patient information and our clinical history. And then because the new section was down here, it gave me a new section after this one. And so we have our block row header up here and then our 2 block headers here. And does anyone have any questions about the questionnaire dictionary before I branch into the system, just to show you how this looks in finding entry? Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions. So I am going to go into enter findings in pathology. So I'm going to go pathology, findings entry, and enter finding standards, and just pull this specimen in and show you how it looks in findings entry for the questionnaire. Okay, and that questionnaire that I had just worked on was associated to our clinical history questionnaire type data section. So now our edit questionnaire is set to yes. So if you want to edit the questionnaire, you'll set to yes here. I didn't save it so that the prompt didn't appear, and I still have my 2 sections. So basically, this is what your questionnaire will look like in result entry. As you can see, this adequate one, it has a star next to it. So that means it's a required prompt. Anything with a required prompt is going to be starred. If I enter N in this one, you can see the time defaulted in is now, and then it defaulted the adequate screen, and a response defaulted in because that was set up in the prompt dictionary. And then again, you would just go through each prompt and answer each one as you saw fit. And then once you save this, it will save to the specimen into this data section. Okay, I'll just pause another second. Any questions on the prompts or questionnaires before I move into access and customer defined parameters? Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our access settings. So basically, the LIS access dictionary on pages 6 and 7 has the access settings for pathology. So I'm going to jump over to the system and go through those. So our pathway now is again going to be ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries. We're going to go LIS, A through L, and access. And I'm going to pull in our pathologist user group. So on page 6 is where these begin. Our first field here is a yes or no field, allow assignment. If you answer yes here, users in this access group will be able to have pathology cases assigned to them. If you answer no, they will not. Edit addendum, this is also a yes or no field. If you enter yes here, users in this group can edit addendums. If no, they are not able to. Can sign out and can sign out ABM. So this is whether the users in this access group can sign out either non-abnormal or abnormal pathology cases. Our options here for these are preliminary sign out, final sign out. You would enter both if users can sign out prelim and final sign out normal specimens. None if they have no access to sign out. QC if they are only able to sign out QC specimens. And abnormal, we have the same options, just without an option for QC. Sign out file options. So this field determines on the file option screen whether to print or change report format when users are signing out. Our options here are N for there will be no for no report to review, A for ask, so we'll ask users if they want to view or change the report format, R means the report will automatically show for review, and C will give them the option to change the format, but the report will show up. Our next 2 fields are B sign out and B sign out abnormal. These work very similar to our can sign out and can sign out abnormal fields. We're going to have the same options, whether it's prelim, final, both, none, or QC. What these here do is allow users in these access groups to be authorized to sign out for pathologists. So if you want users in this group to sign out for others or other pathologists, you would fill out these fields here. Next field down is sign out review required. This is again a yes or no field. If you answer yes here, report will automatically appear in the sign out routine to these users. If you answer no, then the report will not appear and they're not required to sign it out. Next up, we have our can remove signatures field, as Lorena explained earlier, if you set this as a yes here, users in this access group can remove signatures. If it's no, they are not able to do that. Our next field is sign out and enter edit results. This is a yes or no field. If you enter yes here, users in this group will have access to branch into the sign out routine from enter edit findings. If not, they would need to exit enter edit findings and manually branch into the sign out routine. Process related findings view. So this is going to be a lookup to our LIS report format. You're going to define the report format that is going to be used to view related specimens if the user is on the process relating findings tab. So you would define that report format here. Inquire from enter edit requisition. This is again a yes or no field. If you enter yes here, it will allow users to inquire about related pathology findings from the enter edit requisition routine. If you enter no, they will not be able to do that. Edit after sign out is another yes or no field. If you enter yes here, users in this group can edit after sign out. If not, they will not be able to make edits to a pathology case after sign out. If you'd like to track and limit how many slides per hour or slides per day users in this access group can read, they'll be warned once they hit this limit. You could define your slides per hour here and your slides per day here. So again, if a user hits 100 slides per day that they've reviewed in the system, they'll get a warning that they're not able to review any more slides for that day or for that hour. Dictated by user, the yes or no field. If you enter yes here, it will allow users in this access group to appear in the lookup in the dictated by fields and enter edit findings. Down here we have some defaults for the pathology sign out routine. So here you can set in the from and through dates that you want to default into the routine. Electronic signature is a yes or no field. If you want users in this group to be able to electronically sign out specimens, you would enter a yes here. If not, enter no. Once you enter Y here, you'll have your password timeout fields available. This is how often users in this group will need to re-enter their password when they're in the electronic sign-out routine. This number is a free text field, but it is in seconds, so this would mean users have to enter their password every 100 seconds. Review format is again going to be another lookup to our LIS report formats. This is the format for the report when users in this group are reviewing and sign out. Use assigned to, this is typically set to yes, again a yes or no field. If this is set to yes, only specimens assigned to this user will appear in the sign out routine. Again, with the dictated by typically set to yes, that would mean that only specimens dictated by this user would appear in their sign out routine. Edit parameters is a yes or no field. If you set this to yes, users in this group can edit the sign out defaults while they're in the sign out routine. If you do not want them to be able to edit that, you would set that to no. Here we can further define review formats. So if you want to define your specimen types, this is a lookup to the past specimen type dictionary and associated specific review format for that specimen type, or based on department prefix for these users, you can do that here. And then on page 7, some more defaults for pathology sign-outs. Here you can do a lookup to our default statuses, to the past specimen statuses, and then you can assign which statuses should default into the sign-out routine. This is going to be a lookup to past departments. If you want to restrict it to departments, you would enter those here. If you want to restrict to any specific specimen types while in the sign-out routine, you would enter that here, and this will again be a lookup to our pathology specimen type. If you want users in this access group to have access to any confidential pathology data sections, we don't have any listed, but if you had confidential, you could assign those here. If you want users in this access group to be restricted to certain pathology entry screens, you can do a lookup to the pathology findings entry screen dictionary and associate any entry screens that you would like to restrict these users to. Down here we have our pathology QA. So if you're using pathology QA, if you want to index specimens to QA, this is how you would set that up for users in this group. So you index X out of 10. So as this is now, 1 out of every 10 cases this user signs out would index to QA. You can set this anywhere from 0 to 10. If you would like to include abnormal to QA, you would set this to yes, otherwise set to no. And the data sections you want available in QA for these users, you can define that here. This is going to be a lookup to our pathology data section dictionary. You're going to define any data sections here that you want to default into the QA routine. Down below, we have some histology processing settings. So basically, you can just kind of go through and customize how it will select specimens for these users when they're in the histology processing routine. Are there any questions on the pathology access settings before I move to the customer defined parameters? Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions about access. So the last dictionary I'm going to touch on is the customer defined parameters for pathology. So all of these parameters are specific to the pathology module and can be defined by the user on site at will. I'm going to jump back into the system and we're going to use, again, the same pathway: ancillary, laboratory, dictionaries, LIS, A through L. And now we're going to come to custom parameters and we're going to click enter edit path for the pathology one. Okay, at the top of page 1 here, this is where you can assign your specimen number format. So our prefix field, we're going to define our department prefix that we want to create a specimen number format for. This field is now grayed out. Once you create the specimen number format, you are not able to go back and edit it. If you'd like to change how a specimen number is formatted, you would need to create a new department and associate it that way. So this is basically how you want the specimen numbers to show. Your choices here are P for prefix, Y for year, N for number, D for date, which is the day of the month. If you have multi-databases, you can use L for your database letters, R for priority, and then you're also able to use non-alphanumeric characters such as a semicolon, a dash, or a comma. Default next is a yes or no field. If you set yes here, it will default in the next specimen number and to enter edit requisition, as Lorena showed earlier. If you enter no, it will not default the next number. Zero pad is a yes or no field. If you want the system to automatically pad your specimen number format with additional zeros, you would enter yes, otherwise enter no. Here we can enter prefix names for our department. So you would get a lookup to your available EMR names and associate the correct EMR ID you would like to associate to this department. And then we have a lookup to our LIS report format dictionary again, and you can associate the report you want to use for sign out or preliminary sign out, so for the specific department. And then you can also set defaults down here for this. Again, the EMR report hierarchy, it will look at the specimen type first. If that's not defined, it will come up here and look at the department one. If that's not defined, then it will go to your defaults here. And again, there's some defaults for Ask Tissue ID and Ask Tissue Description. As you saw earlier, you can define these further in some of the dictionaries. But if, as a default, you would like the system to ask the tissue ID, you would hit yes here. If you would like it to ask tissue description, you would enter yes here. And again, you can further define that on the specimen type. Lorena did mention that the system can count slides. So if you also want to associate slides, not just on the procedures, if you want to associate the slides based on read data sections, you can do that here. You would want to define any data sections from our pathology data section dictionary that you want the system to automatically tally slides for. Allow past specimen messages is another yes or no field. If you enter yes here, then you will have access to the pathology specimen messages. If you enter no, then pathology specimen messaging will be disabled. Uppercase dictated by is a yes or no field. If you want the system to automatically convert any lowercase letters for the dictated by user into uppercase, enter yes. If not, enter no, and it will keep it as it's typed in. Free text for slide tracking is another yes or no field. If you enter yes here, then users will be able to enter free text to identify slides in the slide field and the enter edit send out slide routine. If you enter no here, they'll have to look up the slides from a lookup. QA hold from sign out is another yes or no field. If you enter yes here, the system will automatically prevent sign out before the system can index the specimen for QA that's set to be indexed. If you enter no here, the system will allow the specimen to sign out before it is indexed for quality assurance. Here you can set whether you would like to have the system calculate overdue by shortest or longest. You would enter S for shortest or L for longest. Next, we have our findings not available. Free text field, so here you want to enter the free text that you want to appear when the findings are not yet available. Up here we have our user signatures, so this is going to be a lookup to our user dictionary. And then if you want to associate a picture of the user's signature, you can associate that picture here. And on page 2, in the top left here, we have our histology processing. So these are just some defaults for our histology processing. Our first field here is a yes or no field. What this will do is add an alphabetical code to the block range of the tissue ID in the blocks field on the process histology screen. You would enter Y if you'd like the system to do that. Otherwise, you would enter no. If you enter a Y, then after you enter a number in the blocks column, the system changes the numeral to a letter range automatically. For example, if a user enters 4 in the blocks column, the system will automatically convert it to A to D. Our next field down is our frozen blocks prefix character. This is the character you want the system to use to indicate that a block is a frozen section. You can enter a 1 or 2 character prefix. So here we have a tilde. You could enter an asterisk or any type of character you want to indicate that the block is a frozen block. Frozen blocks prefix alpha. This is a yes or no field. If you enter a Y here, it will add an alpha block range to frozen blocks. For example, if you had an asterisk up here, you would get asterisk A, asterisk B, asterisk C for the frozen blocks. If you enter no, you get asterisk 1, asterisk 2, asterisk 3 for the frozen blocks. If you want to associate any charge procedures for your frozen blocks, you can do so here. This is going to be a lookup to our path medical terms, so the path procedure type. So you're going to associate any charge type procedures for the first frozen block and for any additional blocks down here. Over here is our exclude coding concepts field. If you are using SNOMED and coding through that, if there are certain concepts you do not want the system to automatically code, you would enter those here. Next field down is our corrected reports header text. So this is going to be a lookup to our LIS CAN text dictionary. You're going to enter the CAN text here you want to appear on reports when the report has been corrected. Print pathology specimen labels per tissue is a yes or no field. If you enter no here, the system will print 1 label for each requisition regardless of the number of tissues entered. If you enter Y, you're going to get a label for each tissue. And lastly, we have our synoptic reporting field down here. I'm actually not going to touch on these today because these are used exclusively for synoptic reporting and is covered in a separate training. So that concludes our dictionaries. Is there any questions at this time about anything we've covered today? It does look like we have one question that came up. How are pictures uploaded? Are you asking how images are uploaded to a data section or how pictures are uploaded for the signature? So the pictures are uploaded to the computer, so you would choose your user here. And then these would need to be uploaded to the MIS picture routine. So that is done through MIS. And then once the pictures are in the MIS picture routine, you can associate them here to the user. If you have additional questions about how specifically that is done, I would suggest you reach out to your MIS specialist since that's done specifically through their routine. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. I'd like to thank everybody for attending